A couple of days after Joanne and her baby, Alex Katranak, disappeared from Catasauqua, Pennsylvania without a trace on December 15, 1994, a full-scale investigation ensued. The Pennsylvania State Police took the lead on the investigation with help from the FBI. The Katranak house and garage was searched and some evidence collected from the site. Joe's car was towed away and processed. A reward was announced, and investigators interviewed dozens upon dozens of people. People who lived in the area, people who knew the Katranaks, people Joe had worked with, people at businesses she patronized. And of course, the prime suspects, Andy Katranak and Joe's ex-husband Michael Jack, were closely scrutinized. Joe's family felt confident that Andy had nothing to do with the disappearance of their daughter and their grandson. In fact, her mother stated that Joe was very happy in her marriage to Andy. But her first marriage, the one to Michael Jack, that had been a bad one. Jack didn't live close by, though. He lived in Randolph, New Jersey, about 90 minutes away. But that didn't mean he couldn't have been involved. Catasauqua officer Barry Grube contacted the Randolph police, and a lieutenant was dispatched to speak to Michael Jack. Jack told him he was at work all day on the 15th, which was confirmed by his employer. Jack told investigators he hadn't spoken to Joe in 3 years and didn't even know where she lived or that she was married and had a baby. Jack wasn't off the hook yet, though. The police brought him in for another interview and a polygraph, but not until March 23, 1995. By then, weeks, then months had dragged on with no sign of Joanne and Alex. During the meeting, Jack admitted their relationship was tumultuous, with lots of screaming matches and some physical altercations. He described Joe as heartless, that she would say and do things to hurt him and never apologize. She was never happy with any of the gifts he brought her, never empathetic to him, even when his father died. Maybe it was because her own relationship with her father was terrible. She hated her father, according to Jack. Jack was sure that Joe had taken off with the baby on her own. She was like that, he said. Clearly, there was no love lost between Joe and her ex, yet he passed the polygraph just fine. That, coupled with the fact that he was with his employer all day in another state, cleared him as a suspect. But Andy, well, he wasn't cleared just yet, especially because he failed every polygraph they gave him. Hi and welcome to Undisclosed, Towards Justice, the State versus Patricia Rorrer. My name is Rabia Chaudhry. I'm an attorney and author, and I'm here with my colleague, Colin Miller.
We can only imagine the chagrin of the investigators as the days and weeks went by, and they were no closer to finding any evidence that could link their prime suspect, Andy Katranak, to his wife and child's disappearance. Andy had insisted from the beginning that Joe and he had a wonderful marriage, to the extent they never even had an argument. But investigators were learning from other sources that there were some strains in the marriage after the birth of baby Alex. One such source was a New Jersey State Police officer whose wife worked with Joe's mother, Sally O'Connor. Sally had told his wife that Joe had been depressed after the baby was born, and that Andy had begun sleeping in a different room because he couldn't stand to hear the baby cry at night. None of this is unusual in a postpartum household, but it bears noting that Andy himself didn't tell the police that Joe was depressed or that they had begun sleeping apart. This could be because he didn't want the police to think she may have left on her own and dismiss his firm belief that she had been kidnapped. Or it could be because any hint of unhappiness in their marriage might make investigators focus on him, which, of course, they were doing regardless. The problem they were running up against was the fact that Andy was alibied by both of his parents. Andy's mother stated that she spoke to Joe around 1:30 p.m. that day that she disappeared, and his father stated that Andy never left the worksite all day. Investigators must have thought there was a possibility that the alibis were fabricated because they still did their due diligence. They checked Andy's criminal background, nothing to be found. Not a single interaction with any law enforcement agency in the region. They did an inquiry with the firearms division to see if he or Joe owned any gun or even had a permit to carry. Again, nothing to be found. No gun could be traced to either of them. They interviewed Andy repeatedly and then brought him in for the first of two polygraphs that we know about on December 19, 1994, 4 days after Joe and Alex were reported missing. We don't have copies of the actual tests, but there is a mention of them in the police reports. According to a police report, Andy waived his right to refuse the test, was given a pre-test interview to set a baseline, and then was asked the following relevant questions. 1. Are you attempting to withhold any information concerning the disappearance of your wife and son? 2. Do you know where your wife and son are located? 3. Are you attempting to mislead anyone regarding what happened to your wife and son? And 4. Did you personally have any involvement in the disappearance of your wife and son? Andy answered each of these questions with a no. An examination of the polygraph results led the examiner to determine that Andy had been deceptive about 3 of the 4 relevant questions. In a post-test interview, Andy was told that he had essentially failed the test, and he admitted that he had indeed withheld information from the officers. According to Andy, when officers came to his house after he reported Joe and Alex missing, he had removed a vibrator from the couple's bedroom and hidden it from view. He had been thinking about the vibrator during the polygraph, he said, and that was why it threw off the results.
That wasn't all, though. To quote from the police report, Andy, quote, strongly denied any involvement with his wife and child's disappearance. He admitted that he was not sure that the wood screws and the plywood had been tampered with, but he told the Catasauqua police that they had been. He was trying to get them to take this more seriously. He advised that he did not tamper with the cut phone line or the recovered vehicle. It is very odd that Andy felt he had to represent to the police that the wood screws on the cellar door may have been tampered with when the actual hasp had been pulled out from the frame. The hasp, which was clearly jimmied open, would have been enough to convince the police that there had been a break-in. This detail, like others, is just weird. The officers took his explanations with a grain of salt and asked him to come in the next day for another polygraph. Andy agreed, and the next day, December 20th, they brought Andy in for the second poly. The relevant questions this time were, 1. Are you now intentionally lying about the disappearance of your wife and son? 2. Are you attempting to conceal the whereabouts of your wife and son? 3. Did you make up any part of your story about your wife and son's disappearance? And 4. Could you right now take me to where your wife and son are located? This time it was determined that Andy was being deceptive about that third question, the one in which he is asked if he made up any part of the story about the disappearance. A post-poly interview didn't yield much, other than Andy again insisting he had nothing to do with his family's disappearance and had no idea where they were. Clearly not satisfied, though, the state investigators turned over the results of the polygraphs to the feds, and a meeting was set up for Andy to be polygraphed by an FBI examiner. What came of that polygraph? We don't know, because no documentation related to it is in any of our files. Now, hindsight being 2020, when we go through decades-old investigative files, it's hard not to see glaring gaps in an investigation. On the face of it, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of police and FBI reports, countless interviews, and dozens of leads followed to no conclusion in the Katernak files. But given the fact that Andy was the prime suspect, had shown deception on polygraphs, but was saved by his alibis, Well, it's rather astonishing that no one thought to polygraph the alibis themselves, Andy's parents. On the other hand, polygraphs are not evidence, as undisclosed listeners know, and couldn't have been the basis for an arrest even if all three, Andy and his parents, had failed them repeatedly. A failed lie detector test could only point investigators in a direction, but in this case, even that direction wasn't clear yet, because no one knew what had happened to Joe and Alex Katernak.
While the investigators did search the Katernak home, describing it as thorough would be a stretch. True, they did take a search and rescue dog through the house, but an SAR dog is not the same as what's colloquially referred to as a cadaver dog. An SAR dog is trained to find living people, not to indicate human decomposition. In this case, the brief write-up we have of the search by Teddy, the SAR dog, shows that it was run through the house in a matter of 10 minutes. Teddy was then led outside, where he checked the area where Joe's car was found, went through the alley, and alerted in a pile of brush past the alley. A few minutes later, he alerted in the same pile of brush. His handlers took Teddy out of the area, cleared some of the brush and wood from where he alerted, and then brought him back. This time, Teddy did not alert in the area, and at that point, they terminated the search. When investigators went through the house 2 days after Joe disappeared, they saw zero disturbance or signs of a struggle, but they still collected a few pieces of evidence: a rusty claw hammer that was sitting on the kitchen table, a bloody tissue and tampons from the bathroom wastebasket, and scrapings of a stain in the hallway that looked like it could be blood. The house was fingerprinted, but there were no prints found that didn't belong there. And as for the broken hasp and lock on the cellar door, no prints were found at all. Which makes sense if Joe had already left the house when she was abducted, which all the signs pointed to. According to Andy, Joe carried baby Alex everywhere in the baby carrier. She would strap the baby into the carrier while still inside the house, and then take the carrier to the car and secure it into the base. This, and the fact that Joe's purse and the baby's diaper bag, along with a bottle, were all missing, seems to point to the fact that Joe must have left the house, got into the car, and secured the baby carrier into the seat base all before she disappeared. And wherever she was, her purse and the diaper bag were likely with her. It wasn't until 4 days after Joe and Alex were reported missing that the authorities finally took Joe's car into custody and began processing it. For 3 full days, 4 Pennsylvania state troopers and criminologist Dr. Tom Jensen worked in the vehicle. They recorded the gauges, photographed it inside and out, and collected evidence from the car. One of the officers working on the car commented that it was one of the cleanest vehicles he had ever seen. Like her house, Joe kept her car spotless too. There was some dirt in the gas and brake pedals, and as well, some behind the driver's seat, but for the most part, the car was pristine. Whoever had driven it last had been careful to leave it in the same condition, and had also been careful to leave Joe's set of car keys under the driver's side seat where the investigators found them.
Fingerprinting the car gave what I consider to be strange results. Only 3 prints were found in the entire car. The prints came from the baby car seat and from a piece of paper with directions on it. The prints on the car seat belonged to Peggy Corder, Joe's sister, and the prints on the paper belonged to Andy. In any crime scene, it is important to note not only what evidence is found, but what evidence is missing. The fact that Joe's prints weren't found on the steering wheel or gear shift or any other part of the inside of the car probably means that someone wiped down the car to get rid of prints. Or it could mean that the folks working on the car did a really poor job, which is not beyond belief given some of the evidence collection techniques they used. Under the direction of Dr. Jensen, who will go on to become instrumental in this case, Trooper Ken Koya collected trace evidence from the car using an unorthodox method: Post-it notes. And yes, they were used exactly as you'd imagine. Koya would press down on the evidence with a yellow Post-it note, then fold it in half to preserve it. This method was mostly used to collect fibers and hair, and of that collection was one clump of hair in particular that became central to the case. Stuck to the driver's side headrest was a group of 6 dirty blonde hairs spread out over a few inches that definitely did not belong to the darkly brunette Joanne Katernak. It looked like Andy's hair to Trooper Koya, and he commented, Andy must drive this car. The floor of the passenger side seat also yielded 2 blonde hairs, also seemingly consistent with Andy's hair. What seemed even more important, however, was the fact that there was a positive presence of blood in the same area where the clump of blonde hair was found, using 2 different kinds of chemical tests on site to confirm it. The blood wasn't visually noticeable, but Trooper Koya used a swab test which alerted to it, and then Dr. Jensen went over the same area with a second chemical, which again gave a positive result. Other than that area, no trace of blood was found anywhere else in the car. All of the evidence collected was delivered to Dr. Thomas Jensen at the Pennsylvania State Police Laboratory for further testing, along with the entire driver's seat, which was physically removed from the car. It seemed like investigators had some strong forensic leads, especially with the blood on the driver's side seat. Strangely enough, though, when the car seat was tested in the lab, Dr. Jensen was no longer able to verify that there was any blood, human or otherwise, on it. At trial, when questioned about the presence of blood, his answer was confusing and contradictory. Quote, "I got some sort of positive results, but nothing I could really be sure of," he said. Whatever he meant by that, the bottom line was he was not able to get a blood sample that could later be compared to anyone.
While investigators were focused on Andy, he pointed them in 2 directions: Joe's ex, Michael Jack, and his own ex-girlfriend, Patricia Rorrer, which, given the fact that the area around their home was crawling with all sorts of strangers at all times of day and night, is a bit hard to understand. Andy seemed to believe this was a targeted abduction of Joe and Alex by someone who knew the family and not the act of a stranger, though there was no evidence either way. Nonetheless, Michael Jack's alibi had been verified, and he had been cleared as a suspect within the first week of the disappearance, which left Patricia Rorrer. Andy brought up Patricia Rorrer to investigators multiple times, and when asked why he felt so strongly that Patty Rorrer was involved, he said it was because she had called just days before Joe's disappearance, and because a number of psychics had said that a woman was involved in the kidnapping of his wife and son. Andy told investigators that his only prior serious relationship before marrying Joanne was with Patty Rorrer. They had dated on and off and lived together on and off from 1983 through 1989, before breaking off a romantic relationship completely. But they hadn't cut each other out of each other's lives. They still remained in touch every so often, checking in with each other once or twice a year. They considered each other friends, and on one occasion, Patty had shown up at his door because her boyfriend had assaulted her. Andy had taken her to the hospital, called the police, and gotten the boyfriend arrested. He also helped Patty move her things out of the place that she shared with her boyfriend and let her crash at his home for a couple of days. In an interview with the state police, Andy admitted that Patty would reach out occasionally to see how he was doing, but it was never an effort to rekindle the relationship. Still, he worried now that the fact that Joe had hung up on Patty may have triggered her into taking revenge on his wife.
Investigators did finally speak to Patty Rorrer, but not because they suspected her. Initially, they approached her to learn more about their prime suspect, Andy Katernak. According to police records, though, authorities first spoke to Patty's mother, Patricia Chambers. If you recall, the night that Joe disappeared, Andy called Mrs. Chambers in North Carolina to ask where Patty was. Mrs. Chambers checked on her daughter, who was asleep in bed, and called Andy back to confirm the same with him. The following week, on December 21st, Mrs. Chambers called Andy out of concern for Joe and Alex and to learn if there was any news about them. Andy wasn't home, but instead she ended up connecting with investigators and agreed to be interviewed by the FBI. She told investigators that she was Patty Rorer's mother and that Patty had been Andy's live-in girlfriend for almost 7 years. When asked about Andy, she told them that he has a temper and sometimes gets depressed. He had hit or pushed her daughter at least once during an argument, but she still considered Andy to be a decent man and not capable of hurting anyone seriously. The FBI report notes that Mrs. Chambers brought up the subject about baby Alex's paternity, but it was likely that she was being pressed by investigators to think about any reasons Andy may have hurt his family. According to her, Patty had never practiced birth control in the many years she was with Andy, yet surprisingly, she never became pregnant. Another former live-in girlfriend of Andy's named Shawnee also never became pregnant by him. Both Patty and Shawnee had, however, had children by other men. Mrs. Chambers speculated that Andy may have been infertile, and while she couldn't imagine him hurting Joe and Alex, perhaps his wife left him to be with another man, a man that was baby Alex's real father. She went on to say that Patty and Andy's relationship was friendly, even years after they broke up, until the last time Patty called his house. Patty told her mother that when she called, Andy's wife picked up, yelled, "What the fuck are you calling here for? Andy's married now and we have a baby," and hung up on her. At that point, Patty decided she would never call Andy again.
Patty Rorrer was contacted for the very first time by authorities on December 22, 1994, exactly a week after Joe and Alex Kachernak had disappeared. Investigators located Patty at her mother's home in Lexington, North Carolina, and they spoke to her at length, resulting in a 7-page police report. Patty told the investigators that she first met Andy Kachernak in 1984 while working at her family's diner in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They began dating, and she moved in with him 6 to 8 months later. Eventually, they bought a home together, but after 2 years she moved out and back to North Carolina and gave up making payments in the house, which ended up getting foreclosed upon. While Patty had never gotten pregnant by Andy, she had had a son in 1982 before meeting him. Tragically, she had lost the baby due to SIDS and had a lot of difficulty with the loss. She was still in grief when she met Andy, and sometimes her moodiness and depression caused arguments between the two of them. Andy had pushed her down in the bed once, and once attempted to backhand her, but she blocked him with her foot, but otherwise, he had never been violent with her or anyone else as far as she knew. Their breakup was amicable, which is why they continued to stay in touch, even after she found out about his marriage. That was the last time she had spoken to Andy, about 6 months prior, and he told her that Joe and him were married and expecting a baby. Patty had never met Joe, and had only spoken to her briefly twice, once a year earlier, and the second time was when Joe hung up on her. She had called to give Annie some news she was excited about. In fact, she'd been calling all of her friends to share the news. Patty had just returned from Oklahoma on December 5th. There, she had taken part in the U.S. finals for team penning, a fast-paced equestrian sport where 3 riders on horseback separate and herd cattle into small pens within a tight time limit. The fact that their team had even qualified was a big deal, but the bigger deal was this: they had won the national championship. And so, she called all of her friends in the day or two after getting back. On December 7th, she had called Andy to tell him as well, and that was when Joe picked up the phone and hung up on her. If Patty had called Andy's house on December 7th, that would have been over a week before Joe disappeared, not just a few days before, like Andy had said. Put a pin in that, because of course the call records would be instrumental down the line. Patty went on to tell the investigators about Andy's other girlfriends, women he dated and lived with before and after Patty, and told them that she didn't know of any enemies that he might have. She did mention her own ex-boyfriend, the one that had assaulted her, the one that Andy had helped to get arrested. All in all, Patty gave Andy a clean bill, telling the police he didn't have the temperament to harm his wife or child. Patty first learned about Joe and Alex's disappearance when her mother called her in the middle of the night on December 16th at 3 a.m. and told her that Andy said his wife and child were missing, and he was asking where Patty was. Not long after that, Andy had another conversation with her mother and told her to convey to Patty not to ever call him again. And so she didn't, even when she learned that Joe and Alex were missing. Most of the interview with Patty seemed to be about Andy and what Patty could tell the police about him. But she was still questioned about her own whereabouts around the time that Joe and Alex disappeared, and whether there were people who could corroborate her. Patty didn't hesitate to go through her activities for the prior week. On December 14th, she had purchased kerosene between 7 and 8 p.m. at a gas station in Tyro, North Carolina. She had also stopped by another gas station because she had lost a key and went back to see if she had left it there. She had bought grain for the horses every Thursday, so the prior Thursday, December 15th, the day that Joe and Alex disappeared, she had bought grain from the Welcome Milling Company in Welcome, North Carolina. That same afternoon, she saw her neighbor Tina between 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. As Patty explained to the FBI agent, she had up to 8 horses and 2 goats to take care of at any given time and couldn't be away without arranging for their care. The agent then said to her, okay, that's enough, as if he was satisfied that she was indeed in North Carolina when Joe and Alex went missing. At the very end of the conversation, Patty told the investigators she was willing to help in any way possible, and if they wanted her to take a polygraph, she was open to that too. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything that Patty told the authorities that would have helped to make a case against Andy, and so their investigation continued. They moved on to other potential witnesses, canvassed the neighborhood, contacted anyone that knew the Katrineks, checked all the local businesses, looking for any clue that could tell them whether the mother and child were dead or alive.
On April 9th, 1995, 4 months after Joe and Alex went missing, Pennsylvania State Trooper Joseph Vasquez was contacted by Trooper Mark Murray of Troop M Bethlehem that human remains had been found in Heidelberg Township. A farmer plowing his field had discovered the remains in a patch of woods in Slatington, Pennsylvania. The farmer, Paul Kowalczyk, was waiting at his home with the first responding officer, Trooper Thomas Mays, when Trooper Vasquez arrived. Together, they accompanied Vasquez to where not one, but 2 bodies had been found. Trooper Mays advised Trooper Vasquez that he had not disturbed the scene at all. Vasquez approached the scene, which was about 200 yards away from the closest intersection. The open field where Kowalczyk was plowing was a mere 50 feet from the bodies. As he approached, he saw baby items strewn about: a diaper bag, a baby bottle and a cap, a blue toy telephone. The figures were partially covered by leaves and branches, but it soon became clear that there was one adult victim, a female, and an infant, both long deceased, laying mere yards away from a well-used path through the woods. The woman was on her back. Her legs were bent, one arm straight out from her body, the other laying across her chest. She was wearing blue jeans, black boots, a gray sweatshirt, and a brown leather jacket. She had long, dark, curly hair. Her face was decomposed. The infant was dressed in a blue winter baby snowsuit. It was placed face down on top of the left side of the woman's torso. Its legs hung down, arms stretched out. It was a baby boy. Trooper Vasquez was almost certain about who the victims were. Months earlier, his Christmas vacation had been canceled because he was needed to assist in the investigation of a missing woman and her baby, Joanne and Alex Katrinak. He had begun working on the case just 2 days after their disappearance and had spoken to Joe's husband Andy almost every single day for months. Now, 4 months after their disappearance, they finally knew what became of the mother and son. Around 6 p.m., authorities contacted the parents of Joanne Katrinak and her husband Andy to inform them that Joe and Alex had been found murdered. The missing persons investigation was now a homicide investigation.
The bodies of 26-year-old Joanne Katrinak and her 3-month-old son Alex were found in Heidelberg Township, Lehigh County.
when the bodies were found. There was a period of time there when it was very difficult for the officers that were assigned to this investigation. Took it very personally, and it was hard because I think they were holding out hope that, she was going to be found alive.
Next time on Undisclosed. As we all know, there is always more to the story. So tune in every Thursday during this entire season where we're going to be dropping our addendum episodes. In those episodes, we will go deeper on some of the issues raised in that week's episode, and we're going to answer listener questions. And if you want even more undisclosed content, remember, you can become a patron by signing up at patreon.com/undisclosedpod. And if you've got feedback for us, you can find us at speakpipe.com/undisclosed, where you can leave us an actual voice note. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Undisclosed Pod. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Undisclosed Pod. And we've got our own little private Facebook group called the Toward Justice Community. All you gotta do is answer 3 quick questions and I will let you in. You can follow me, Rabia, on Instagram at Rabia2, the number 2. And you can follow Colin at Evidence Prof on X and Blue Sky. Follow the podcast on X at Undisclosed Pod. We want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank our intrepid team, our sound editor, Hannah McCarthy, our executive producer, Mithil Thelhan, and my amazing investigator, Jennifer Leahy. And a very special thank you to true crime author and advocate Tammy Mall, who made this season possible. Thank you, Tammy, for all your work.